You're watching CCN, Clarksville Community Network.
Produced by Goodwin Productions. Powered by CDE Lightband.
Well, I'm joined on the beautiful stage of the George and Sharon Mabry Concert Hall here on the campus of Austin Peay State University by one of our terrific violinists with the Gateway Chamber Orchestra. This is Amy Helman. Amy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So we've been able to spend a little bit of time putting together some music for a children's story, and it's been just a real treat to hear you out of the orchestra and playing solo literature with piano. Just beautiful to hear.
Thank you.
So you've been playing with us for since the fairly early days of the Chamber Orchestra.
Yes, maybe a couple years into.
Yeah, I'm going to guess somewhere around 2012, just as the group is sort of catching its stride and becoming its own entity. Could you tell us a little bit about your path to being in Middle Tennessee?
Yes. Well, I first started my sort of musical path by starting piano. My mother's an accomplished pianist.
Oh, fantastic.
So she started teaching me when I was very little. And then they started to take us, I have two older brothers, take us to see, we would drive up to Atlanta. I'm from Macon, Georgia. They would take us occasionally to see the Atlanta Symphony. And apparently I turned to my parents and said, I want to do that. When the concertmaster walked out, like, I want to play violin. And they're
Wonderful.
like, okay. And then when the time came and they were offering violin in the schools, I got to start in 4th grade, and then I got a private teacher. And what brought me here to Tennessee is that I did my undergraduate degree at Vanderbilt University, the Blair School of Music. And when I finished there, I did go up to Evanston, just north of Chicago, and I got my master's at Northwestern. Then I finished there and I decided that winters were too cold in Chicago. So I came back to Nashville and I've been here ever since.
Fantastic. So in addition to the Chamber Orchestra, I know that you do a fair amount in the recording studios and also play with a number of other groups. What are some of the other things that you're up to?
Yes, I do a lot of recording work. Where we record video game scores and scores for movies and different TV shows. I also play as a substitute musician with the Nashville Symphony, and then I have a small private studio of students.
Wonderful, wonderful. Have you been able to keep busy at all during this COVID pandemic?
A little bit. I would say my schedule is picking back up with some studio work, but I have been keeping busy. I set a goal for myself during the pandemic that I would read a book a week. So I'm up to, I think, 24 books now.
Wow.
I got to catch up on my reading.
Well, very well read. I think all of us have come up with new hobbies or expanded on older hobbies.
Yes.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the pieces that you've just played for us. The name Boulanger is one that those of us trained in music frequently associate with a very specific person, and who would that be?
Yes, the Boulanger that most musicians have heard of would be Nadia Boulanger. But she had a younger sister, and her name was Lily. Unfortunately, Lily passed away at a young age. She was 24 years old, and so who knows what beautiful music she could have gone on to write for the rest of her life. But thankfully, she did leave behind a very small but beautiful sort of list of works.
Wonderful.
And she actually won, she was the first female to win the Prix de Rome in, I believe, 1919.
Wow.
She was about 20 years old when she won.
Wow. Well, what's fascinating about the Boulanger family, for those of you who aren't familiar with her, Nadia Boulanger taught just outside of Paris at Fontainebleau, I think it is. And but what I think is amazing, the number of different composers that all studied with her.
Yes.
And when we think about this past century, Aaron Copland, Roy Harris, Walter Piston, Quincy Jones even studied with Nadia Boulanger, and I think she lived into her 90s.
She did.
Yeah.
She also taught Philip Glass, who's one of my favorite composers.
Absolutely. We did our work by him was that a year? It was 2 years ago.
Recently.
I've lost track of time. Yeah.
A family friend of theirs was actually Fauré.
Really?
And when she was 2 years old, Fauré was over at their house, and he discovered that she had perfect pitch.
Really?
Somehow, that's the story. Yeah.
She has a little bump
2
behind
years
her
old.
ear.
I'm
There's
like, what?
some new study where they say that most people that have perfect pitch have a small bump behind their ear.
That's crazy.
Totally flat back there. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah. I have good relative pitch.
You have great relative pitch. You sound terrific. So.
Thanks. So I play on a French violin made in Paris in 1896. So this violin was around when that piece was written in 1911.
Oh, wow.
So I like to think about.
Now, did the Boulanger family own it?
No, I don't know actually the provenance of my instrument, which is sad.
Oh, so you can't rule it out.
It's a possibility.
It's possible. I would just go with it. Lily Boulanger's instrument right here.
So I don't know. It's kind of serendipitous.
It's terrific. Yeah. So Lily Boulanger, the work that you've just performed for us is called?
It's called Nocturne.
Nocturne.
And it's written for solo violin or flute and piano.
Well, it was an absolutely beautiful work. It's such a great opportunity to hear you, and I'm sure our audience is going to enjoy hearing it. Amy Helman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Well, joining me today on the stage of the beautiful Mabry Concert Hall here at Austin Peay State University is my wife, Lisa. And I have to say, I've been doing these interviews for a couple of days, and in the midst of the COVID pandemic, we've been a little bit separated apart. So it's nice to be a little bit closer to someone I'm talking to. How are you?
I'm doing well, and it's nice to see my project unfold today.
Well, it's been a very exciting few days, and I thought one of the things I'd like to do is talk a little bit about you and what brought you to Middle Tennessee. And then I want to talk about this project because I've been alluding to it in other conversations, and I think that the audience would like to know about it. So first of all, you are a flutist. What's the difference between a flutist and a flautist?
I think it's the snob factor.
Aha. So which are you?
So I'm a flutist.
Flutist.
Yes.
Terrific. And you're actually not originally from all that far away from this stage here in Clarksville, Tennessee.
That's correct. I grew up in West Kentucky in a town called Paducah, which is a very arts-oriented community, and so I feel very much at home here in Clarksville. The towns are very similar in size and in the sort of arts offerings that they have.
Sure, and once upon a time, the Paducah Symphony didn't exist.
That's correct.
And that's an orchestra that you've played principal in for a number of years. Mm-hmm. But you were around in the early days of that.
I was around in the early days of that. In fact, my mother and some friends of hers were instrumental in the early days of getting the symphony up and going. So I got to see them sweeping floors and moving chairs and all the sort of muscle work that really goes behind getting an orchestra up and running.
Sure, and you've told the story before that in many ways you've seen the Paducah Symphony sort of start at your dining room table almost.
That's right.
As a child.
Yes, because I was a kid and everyone would come to our house so that my mom wouldn't have to find a sitter for us and sit around the kitchen table and make plans for the upcoming concert or upcoming season or whatever.
Sure. So, you grew up in Paducah and then you went away and got trained. Where did you learn to play flute so well?
So I started my training at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. After that, I headed down the Mississippi River all the way to Baton Rouge, Louisiana for my doctorate, but sort of in the middle of my doctorate, I decided I would spend a little time and studied in Manchester, England. And then just about the time I was finishing up my doctoral degree, I was offered the job here at Austin Peay State University, which I embraced. I was happy to be home and close to family and in a community that felt very much at home.
Well, so then in 2008, another orchestra started sort of at your dining room table.
That's right,
and we ended up with what has grown into the Gateway Chamber Orchestra. And that brings us up to the last few years. As the orchestra has grown, we've been able to fill this hall with wonderful audiences and fill this stage with wonderful musicians. And then, of course, this spring, just as we were getting geared up for the Haydn Festival, everything came to a halt.
It sure did.
And over the course of the summer, we spent some time playing music together at home, but really this absence of the opportunity to get together with other musicians, really started to become a real thing. And it was at the end of the summer, just as many of the musicians were getting the announcement that other orchestras were going to be shut down for an extended period, that we were fortunate with the Chamber Orchestra that we received a grant from the NEA that allowed us to pursue a project. And we spent a lot of time, as I recall, going for walks during the pandemic.
Absolutely.
Which was probably good, avoiding the COVID-19.
That's right.
But one of the things that we talked about was we had done a school tour about a year and a half ago where there was a lot of arranging of music so that we could actually bring a group of musicians into the schools and use music as a way to help tell a story. In that case, it was a story called The Empty Pot. Is that right?
That's right.
And the idea of how in the world can we recreate that in a series of videos, because we're limited in terms of the number of people who can be together. And the idea came up that, well, I think you might have brought it up. What if instead of the conductor choosing the music,
Yeah, the musicians chose the music, and so Michael Chandler, who played for me today, helped pick a series of books, and the musicians had the opportunity to peruse all of the books and choose the one that interested them most. And when I was a kid, I had the opportunity to go to Mexico. It was the first time my family had really traveled. I was totally fascinated going to this exotic land, and so when I had the opportunity to do a book that had its roots in the culture that had, before it was Mexico, I sort of embraced that.
Well, terrific. And, you know, it was fascinating because each of the musicians, the care with which everyone has taken in assembling the different works. I spoke with Ryan Kochman, talented violinist. You've worked with him before. His book was Japanese in terms of its influence, and he was able to find a Japanese violinist named Nobu Koda, who I'd never heard of before. It was a Romantic era composer. A work that you played by Lily Boulanger a couple years ago. Amy Helman discovered it on her own for a violin, and because one of the tasks was for each of the stories to have at least one work by an underrepresented composer. Maybe you could tell the audience what that means.
Well, an underrepresented composer would be a composer who did not necessarily come from the European tradition, would have come from a different tradition. So again, because my story was rooted in what was to ultimately become Mexico, I thought it would be nice to have a Mexican composer be my underrepresented composer. And in the process of looking for some music, well, there's really not that much music written for flute and piano by Mexican composers that was appropriate for this particular story. But I found a wealth of piano music from the late 1800s and early 19th century. And there was a group of composers who some as students and some as faculty, ended up at the National Conservatory of Music in Mexico. And they shared their love of European music, Romantic music, as well as their love for traditional Mexican folk music. And so they worked to create a style where they fused these two styles of music together. And then as a result of that, then they thought it was important to change the music education in Mexico. And so they were very instrumental in changing the types of things that students would study at the conservatory. Moving forward from it.
Well, and it's been fascinating. I had a conversation with one of our outstanding violinists, Amy Helman, and as I mentioned, she had discovered this piece by Lily Boulanger, but it was amazing the amount of information that she'd found about it. And I think that's one of the things that's been so exciting about this project, is to see how invested the musicians have been. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that they were choosing the music to support the story. So I want to finish up with two little things. You talked about underrepresented composers, certainly the case that of non-European descent, but also wanted to point out that and many of the works that have been chosen are also works by women composers.
Oh, absolutely,
and,
sure.
And that's a group of individuals who are just now really being able to have their voice heard within classical music circles, which is terrific. And then an important part of this is that lesson plans are being created for each of these videos. The narrators, in most of the cases, are elementary general music teachers from here in Montgomery County or Williamson County, are two home bases for the Gateway Chamber Orchestra. And so it's able to create a curriculum, as each of these is going to be wound out every couple of weeks. So you have a piece that you're going to feature, that we're going to feature that you came up with, and you talked about all these different Mexican works that you found, and it was you know, in the house, sort of hearing these different sounds and different composers, and just so emotional. Some of them almost schmaltzy, but still really quite beautiful. But in the end, you ended up settling on a work that you wanted to share that has sort of an interesting history. It's a folk song, right?
That's right. It's La Yorona, and it's a folk song that was written probably around 1600, although they're not quite sure. So that would have been really just right after the time of the Aztec society. And it sort of fell out of favor and was rediscovered in the early 1900s. And it has been used in a variety of settings. There's actually a movie called La Llorona. And then
that wasn't the movie I thought you were going to mention.
I know. And so then most recently it's been used in the movie for Coco. And in the traditional setting, this song would have been sung by an individual and accompanied on a guitar. So I couldn't find an arrangement of this that I felt was appropriate for the setting that I wanted. So I created one and was trying to create an accompaniment that sounded very much like a guitar. And I think Michael did a lovely job of making that happen.
I think you did. And it's been just so rewarding to hear you working on this arrangement that you came up with and that Michael was able to help realize. And I think the audience is going to really enjoy La Yorona.
For current and exclusive content, subscribe to CDE Lightband, connecting you at the speed of light.